Hi everyone, it's Linda from LyndaCreates. This is part 2 of my thrifted denim vessel that I'm making. In this one, I'm going to be continuing to finish off this vessel. So I've done a little more stitching in between, but I decided to stop and not do too much more until I start assembling it a little bit so I can see where I would want to add a few more pieces. So right now this piece is 24.5 inches long and roughly 11 inches high. Again, the height isn't as critical at this moment. I have a lot of excess fabric both on the sides because it's going to wrap around as well, and at the bottom actually down here you can see. What I've done is to do a basting stitch. Now a lot of pieces are being held in place by the Boro stitching or Boro stitching. I'm going to call it Boro stitching because that's how I grew up with learning it. So there's the Boro stitching is here. So now what I'm going to do is I need to turn this into a tube. So this is the back side of the fabric or of the base, and you could see where some places where I have a lot of overlap of fabric, I need to try to align it so that the fabric corners, fabric corners kind of come together as opposed to the excess fabric, and try to square it up as much as possible. Now I have it designed to take a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So just to show you, I have a little extra fabric, or I'm missing some of the backing over here. That's okay. I'm going to be hand stitching this together. If you're doing it machine stitching, it'll still be fine. I'm going to check the dimensions. I need it to be, the finished size needs to be exactly 12 inches from the center to the edge. And I'm going to mark it. So this is 12 inches, and I need to have another, or I'm allowing myself a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So what I have to be careful of is not to catch this fabric that's going to wrap around. I'm going to tuck it and pin it under. So when it's, after it's sewn up, I want that fabric to still be there that I can wrap it around. Same with this yellow. So now if you're doing this on a sewing machine, you would just sew it straight. I'm going to do it by hand. I have extras on top. I have extras on bottom. And basically what this is going to do is when I do the inside lining, this is just going to wrap around, and I may have other fabrics as well. I want to tuck this fabric under a bit. So the thing to remember here is that the lining or this backing fabric, I didn't iron it when I first started. The backing fabric was a little shorter than I anticipated, so I'm kind of dealing with trying to carry it out another 1/4 inch. I'm going to sew up this seam right now by hand, just this left-hand side. It's important that the finished size is 12 inches, and we can make it work. We can make it work as long as the top's straight, the bottom's straight, and the fold is straight. So let me go ahead and start sewing this side up. Okay, so I did a basting stitch along this side because the seam was very narrow, but now I could turn it right side out, and we could take a look at what we have right now, especially along that seam. Okay, it's right here. So I just want to say, if you didn't have enough fabric for that seam to do it at exactly 12 inches, if you had some fabric that is coming around, you'll never know the difference. Okay, so the seam is over here. So it really kind of goes that way. So this seam is, actually it's even more over. Okay, so if the seam isn't perfectly aligned over there, you're still going to have some fabric that's going to wrap over, and we're going to do more stitching on this. So we'll finish it off so it will look fine. I'm going to straighten this cut out a little bit, and I'm going to wrap this yellow. I guess the yellow is going to go over. Okay, yeah, so the seam goes right along here. I'll do some nice stitching to hold it closed, to secure it. Now that I have the seam tacked down, let me go ahead and wrap this. Oh, nope, let me go ahead and straighten this cut out a little bit. Okay, so that's going to come around like that. We're just basically going to stitch it like we did before, except now it's in the round. So, for example, that's going to go that way. Okay, and it'll need some stitching here. Something's missing here. Did I drop some fabric somewhere? Okay. Oh, I see. Right. That goes on top. So by the time you're done, you won't know where this connecting seam is if you have these overlapping in different areas. Okay, let me go ahead, and we're going to start stitching, doing some cantha stitching across these areas as well. So it is a lot of stitching now that I can see where I need to put it. The seam is right along here, so it's going right back in here. So you could see I've crossed over with some stitching here. It goes behind here. So what I'm going to do now is do some vertical cantha or Boro stitching here to hold all these little layers in place. They're kind of all coming together in a kind of a weird area, so I really do need to do some Boro stitching and hold everything in place there. Let me show you the other side. Oh, and I had to add some pins again to keep everything straight. So this is the opposite side. There isn't a front and back because it's in the round, but this area is the weaving part, as you can see. So I have something special that I'm going to do here. I'm going to make some yo-yos or Suffolk puffs to place here using some of the fabrics that I have already accenting the front. So in fact, let me go ahead and show you that first. So the first thing I'm going to do is die cut out some 4-inch circles out of the accent fabrics that I have. So I'm just going to show you how easy it is. I have my big shot here. I'm just going to run it through 6 times just because it's fabric. Okay. So what you're going to get is a few threads here and there that aren't cutting, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to try it again because it's fabric. I'm going to cut it, run it through 8 times. 8 times. I think that'll be better, just to make sure. 8. Okay. I know that may seem like a lot, but it's much easier than hand cutting these out. Okay. Yes, definitely 8 times is the secret number. So let me put my machine away and I'll be right back. I have my 4-inch circle and I'm going to turn this into a yo-yo. I'm going to turn under the edge slightly. And then I'm just going to start gathering it on my needle. And I'm going to do this all the way around on each piece, and I'm turning around the edge so that when the yo-yo's done, it'll have a nice clean edge in the center. I'm almost done stitching this first one, gathering the edges around. So I just wanted to show you how I'm going to finish this off. And I also want to show you that I cut some bits of scrap from the leftover pieces when I cut the die cut the circle out. So I just wanted to share that with you. And now I'm just going to gently gather it together. And I'm just pulling it gently. And I have a knot at the other end, so it should go all the way around to the end and stop. And then, okay, so I'm almost there now. I still have about a 1/2 inch opening. I'm going to tuck this spare piece in, this little piece of fabric, a little bit of Yoo-hoo glue on it would hold it in place, and just down inside so the color is facing upwards. Okay, so I have it in there. So when you have that little opening left over after you gather it, you'll see a little bit of colored fabric. You won't see necessarily the inside of or the back side of this main fabric. You'll see this little piece. And you want to tighten this very carefully because you don't want it to break. I have it almost finished. I'm going to push out the sides a little bit to make it a neat little circle. It's very simple, but it's just a little process to make that pretty little round, almost like a rosette. And now when you have it to the shape you want, I don't know if this is the correct way, but I usually tie a knot just to hold it shut. And I'm just going to stitch across a little bit. I'm just going to go across at an angle. I don't want that thread to show, but I want it to hold. Okay, so there's my first yo-yo, or for my UK friends, my Suffolk puff. So let me go ahead and do the same thing for the other two. So there are my 3 Suffolk puffs or yo-yos, and on to the next part of the project. don't know, something like that, like little flowers. So I'm going to attach them with just some white thread and do a little bit of invisible stitching, and it will add some interest here. So I don't have to do a lot of other stitching on the weaving. These should hold it down in place. So I'm just using some white thread, and I'm just going to do some very tiny, as invisible a stitch as I can. So it just a little bit comes up at the front, and the needle travels along from the behind, so you don't really see the long thread part. And the beauty is, like I said, it's also holding down the pieces in back, the woven pieces as well. Okay. So there's the first one attached. And then I'll work on these other two. Now that I have these sewn down, I'm going to go back to the other side and continue stitching this part. So here I was going to do some vertical stitches here to get everything just to hold in place. Want to make sure I'm going straight. I've done a lot of the Boro stitching, canthus stitching, to hold pieces down, but I still have a lot of areas that need to be stitched down, held in place. So what I decided to do to make it subtle and yet stitched is that I'm going to use some embroidery floss, and I decided to use colors that blended fairly close to the background. I want it to be stitched, but I don't want it to stand out. I want the Boro stitching to be the decorative stitch that the eye sees, and I want this next stitching that I'm going to do to be just subtle there, but yet it's subtle. So I have two shades of light blue, and I'm using 3 strands of embroidery floss. And so I'm just going to start stitching all the places that need to be held down in place still, like all of this. So anything where, like here is really interesting because it's the tear part and there's nothing, I'm going to have to go up and around, but I'll use again a subtle color. You can see the canthus stitching or the Boro stitching stands out. So I've also stitched the weaving parts down, but I did it in floss that is similar in color to the denim itself, so it's subtle. So I have that, and I'll just kind of rotate it around. So the tops and bottoms are jagged because I still have the lining and the bottom to add. But you can see I also stitched around these parts because I didn't want them to tear too much more. I wanted to put them in a state of arrested decay. And yeah, so haven't decided which is the front yet. So 2 things I'm going to do now. I wasn't too happy with this area. It kind of looks, although I love the fringe, it doesn't look like it works with everything else. So this is where my little bit of embroidery is going to come in. And as always, I cut it larger than I need to so that I can play with the size. But I'm thinking it's going to be something like this. I'll stitch it down to cover that area and maybe then do some Boro stitching down here. And then the other thing I did is I cut another piece of denim that is 6.5 inches wide, 6.5 tall, and that's going to be the bottom. So similar to how I did the Japanese rice bag is how I'm going to assemble this. So I'm going to do this first. So it's just very close to the size of the embroidery itself. Now I can either do it with the folded edges or I can tear it. I don't want it to line up with this like I had it here. It's too straight, but I have some canthus or Boro stitching down there, so I can move that up. And I can stitch this down the way I did these yo-yos so that it's invisible, but I like the way that's looking. It adds some nice interest. It covers up a spot that I'm having a little bit of trouble with. I don't mind the fact that it's going to have these straight edges. It's kind of a contrast. You have such tattered edges, and then to have something more refined. I like that. And then I'll come back and I will show you how to add the bottom of it. There it is, the nice little bit of embroidery in there. So now we're going to turn this into every 6 inches. So what I'm trying to decide is if the fabric, these bits of fabric are going to wrap underneath, I don't want them to be at the 6-inch mark because they won't turn a corner correctly. I could do it like right here. Okay. So what I need to do is just kind of play with it until this mark is exactly at 6 inches. Okay, so that means when I flip it over, that'll be the 6-inch mark. So I'm putting a pin at all 4 corners. And then you take your 6.5 inch square. So you're going to sew this on, but the pieces you want to wrap around, you have to pin them back so they don't get caught in the stitching. Since we're going to hand sew this, we're going to pin it right sides together. So there's about 1/4 inch here. And you're going to have 1/4 inch overlapping this pin on this side. And you have the right sides together. I'm going to hand sew this seam first, and we'll continue around. So it's pinned to the background fabric. I have the right side of the bottom denim and the right side of the collage here facing each other. I'm starting my needle about 1/4 inch away from the edge there, and I'm just doing a basting stitch. So as I'm stitching, I'm also making sure that I'm only going through the correct layers. I'm doing about 1/4 inch. So I'm going to do a couple little stitches here because this is where I'm going to turn it. Okay. Okay. So now what I have to do So now you're turning it, so that's what the few extra stitches were for in that corner, to hold it. And now you want this corner to come a little bit over that, like about 1/4 of an inch again. Pin that. It's a little awkward. Okay, so I still have my thread going. So now I have this corner and it's a little bunched up there. I'm just starting my thread in there again. At this point, we could turn it inside out and it gets much easier. Okay, so I'm just checking this point, and yeah, I'm off a little bit. I have to say, it is definitely easier turning it this way. And then this last piece, at that point, you got this turning. Just kind of have to work it a little bit. Okay, so this little bit of remaining yellow is going to turn, so I'm going to tuck it under. Just little bits of adjusting. So now we have the last 2 corners done, and we're just going to do a few stitches in this corner again, and then we're going to continue around. I've stitched all the way around. I'm going to turn it and take a look at it before I do a final round and finish it off. Just make sure everything that's sticking out that I need to have sticking out. Okay. Okay. I'll go back in and now do a much neater, tighter stitch. I'll probably do a back stitch because those hold really well. Okay, so I have the bottom all sewed up. I have the pins removed, at least on the corners. So just turning it back out. And now I have these little pieces. That are now going to wrap around to the bottom of the container, to the vessel. So where they were before, I'm just going to pin them down on the curve. Okay. And I also have this piece of yellow here. So now I can do some stitching and do some Boro stitching along the bottom there. And you could see inside the bag. And now these pieces, when I do the lining inside, these pieces are going to fold over and help create that edging up there. So I'm stitching the pieces that wrapped around to the bottom of the vessel. And it's a little more awkward because of the dimensions that it's wrapping, but it definitely adds an interesting look to it. So because all of this woven denim was stitched with the coordinating color, I continued that on the bottom panel and stitched these with coordinating colors. But now with this little piece of yellow up here, since I used the Boro stitching here, I'm going to do some Boro stitching here. So the bottom is all stitched. I could start working on the lining. Okay, I think that's it. So the next thing I'm going to do is in the same dimensions as the front, so 12.5 inches wide by 11 inches high, I'm going to do another shape similar to the outside, but it's going to be using extras of the fabric, and I'm going to do the lining. So that will be part 3. This is the end of part 2, to see how it all comes together into the basic vessel that I'm going to make. And using all this thrifted denim and thrifted fabric. And in part 1, I showed how to make this fabric also look more distressed. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching. This is the end of part 2 of my distressed denim vessel. Had a ton of fun doing this, figuring out the shapes that I want, how I want it to look, how I was going to put it together. I kind of had the dimensions figured out, but I just needed to figure out how I was going to make all of the pieces come together. And utilizing the shredded parts, the distressed parts of the denim in the best way possible, while also incorporating little bits of the faux feed sack cottons. I think I might distress this part a little bit more too, because it looks too bright. And if you didn't see part 1, please make sure and go back and check out part 1 where I show making the fabric part, this denim part. And this is part 2, assembling the outside part of the bag. And part 3 will be assembling the inside lining and also putting everything together to make the entire vessel. So please join me next week for part 3. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like and hit the subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Hit the bell to get notifications when I upload a new video. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!